Man, we are live over here. Okay, my friend, we are live. Six-pack Lapadat, Ryan Gregnol, and we got Mike T, Mr. RPE. How you doing, my man?
Good, good.
Just wanted to, I guess we should start off, maybe give a little bit of background for those who don't know. You've won, I mean, a million titles and records and been powerlifting forever. How many years have you been powerlifting now?
See, I've been competing in like USAPL, IPF competitions since 2003.
Holy smokes.
Yeah. So like just after high school time for me. Before that, I was doing like, the meets that basically everybody starts out with, football teams competing against each other and stuff like that. So,
Yeah. And
yeah.
So you started in high school lifting weights, or were you lifting weights before you started competing?
I started lifting weights before that even. So I started lifting weights, I was 12, so...
Holy smokes! It's like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
yeah, so, and even before I started lifting, I was always interested in, like, physical stuff, Like, I remember just doing push-ups and stuff like that just because I was interested in it. And my brother and I, we had, like, this aluminum baseball bat. And we used that like a barbell, and we do like manual resistance exercises and stuff like that just in our bedroom,
Wow! Yeah, no kid. How old's your brother? Is he younger or older?
Younger, 18 months younger than me.
Is it? Okay, but you guys are close in age. So you guys like?
Oh yeah.
Were you guys like the type that are like best friends / frenemies? Who like you
were
were scrapping it out?
Pretty tight. Brothers fight, I guess, but like the older we got, the better friends we became. And actually, he works on RTS with me now.
Oh, okay.
He does all of our web development and stuff like that, and it's it's been really awesome. We wouldn't be where we're at now without him. Him specifically. So
it's a family business
really
now.
Cool. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
So you were around like 12ish. You were already starting into some of the fitness. When did it carry over into the actual weightlifting, and how did that happen?
So that actually started when I was about 12, and I had like the sand-filled weights that a lot of people had. Like
I remember those.
Right? Yeah, we had a teacher in my junior high school who started a weightlifting club. Now, these clubs only met like once a month or something like that, but it was enough that we would like go to the weight room and he would show us how to do stuff, And I remember like the first time, it wasn't like the first time I benched, but I remember the first time I benched 135. And like that was a big deal because now you get the big boy plates.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. And I wonder if that teacher knew that one of those kids he's teaching would go on to be Mike T. Right? You never know. That's the point. So was he actually, what was the form like? Like, what was his background? Was he actually showing you proper technique, or was it basically just an introduction? It wasn't overly, intricate with it?
I mean, it was kind of your basic introduction. Like, he didn't get super technical with it because, you've got a bunch of 12-year-olds running around with short attention spans. But it was a good introduction. I would say it was a solid introduction. It wasn't like high-level powerlifting technique, but I'm not sure that I would have been in a position to absorb it, even if it was available. So kind of the next step that this whole evolution took, so I got really into lifting weights and just kind of obsessed with it. And I was lifting weights. I was also playing football. And when I got into like my freshman year of high school, so now I'm on the high school football team.
Yeah.
I remember going up to the coach in the weight room. It was like my first day, this freshman. And I come up to him and I was like, "Hey, coach, I wrote my own program. And this is what I'm going to do."
And was this like squats, deadlifts, the whole nine as well in there?
No, it was more like stuff you would see. Well, it had squats and deadlifts and stuff like that in it for sure. But it was definitely more like what you would see in a bodybuilding magazine. But, I'm grateful because like this coach kind of saw this like, well, look, this kid's psyched about lifting weights. Just let him do his thing, And like, I'm not going to get bent out of shape about it. He let me do my thing, and he didn't squash that enthusiasm or anything.
Yeah.
And I mean, I learned pretty rapidly what I needed to do better and stuff like that. But so I've been like writing my own training program since the very beginning, you know.
So when you were that young, who were the guys that you looked up to? Like, I mean, did you even know about powerlifting, or was it like the Arnold Schwarzenegger bigger type deal, or who was it? What was your inspiration? Because that's a young age to all of a sudden take off and start doing
Sure.
this.
Yeah, well, a lot of it was, like, I didn't know specific characters, like, way back then. So it was stuff that I would see in magazines, but I would say around that time, sometime when I was in high school, that was kind of the early days of, you know, the internet, I guess.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
You know, so at least in my world, you know, and so I remember typing in powerlifting.com because like I didn't know what powerlifting was. Like that was just a word I had heard at some point, and it sounded like a thing I might be interested in.
Yeah.
And so like I learned about, oh, okay, these competitions, squat, bench, and deadlift, and wow, they train with like triples.
Yeah.
Like you can do less reps than 5. Like I didn't even know that you could do that. You know, so that was a big eye-opening thing, and I guess from there it kind of grew into Fred Hatfield. He was running drsquat.com from like way in the beginning, and probably somewhere around that time I started picking up a subscription to Powerlifting USA.
Yeah.
And you know, they had like the workout of the month and everything in there, but back in the day, Louis Simmons wrote an article for Powerlifting USA like every month. Now, it was the same article basically every month. You know, it was just like who it was about, or some of the details and stuff were changed, but it was basically just kind of exposing his system every month, you know. Yeah. And that kind of repetition, I guess it worked, because like I feel like I learned a lot from that, and you know, just being exposed to those guys. So I would say those are probably early influences for me.
And then when did you actually start competing in powerlifting? So this is high school. It was just after high school you decided.
So at this time, I was already like a powerlifter in my own head. You know.
Yeah.
Like, you know, a lot of guys were football players that lifted weights in the off season. Like mentally, I was a powerlifter that played football in the off season.
Yeah, gotcha.
So like that's where my headspace was at, and we would have competitions now and then between football teams. There was one that was like a squat and a bench competition, and then there was another one that was, you know, squat, bench, and deadlift, and occasionally you get one that's squat, bench, and power clean or whatever else, you know. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't until probably 2003, so right after high school for me, that's when I got into like real powerlifting competitions. I was a cadet at the Air Force Academy, and they had a powerlifting club team, and I joined that, and you know, we started competing, you know, and their goal, like a lot of collegiate teams, is to go to collegiate nationals. So that's kind of how the whole calendar was organized and everything.
So at this time, it was all just equipped lifting, right? There was no, like, you were IPF right off the bat?
Yeah. Okay. As far as like organized powerlifting, yeah. Well, have you heard of like Sunlight Power?
You know what? So I'm a little old school, not as old school as you. I started around 2007. I have heard of Sunlight Power.
Okay.
I remember those guys, yeah.
I did one Sunlight Power meet, like, this would have been, you know, I was a sophomore in high school or something like that. It's bench and deadlift, run by Dr. Daryl Latch, who was like a one-man powerlifting competition. He would like show up, he had all the stuff like in the back of his car, and he'd put these meets together. He was like judging and keeping score and announcing and everything. Like just one dude doing it all, you know?
Wow.
And, yeah, I mean, and it's like
and even when
Kentucky State Fair or something like that, you know. Like, it was cool. Like, a lot of people got introduced to powerlifting through that, you know, but it was not the same kind of competition that you would see basically anywhere else. But so I guess that was my first like official powerlifting competition. But yeah, like when I started being more serious about it, it was USAPL, IPF, basically from the beginning.
And when did you start making that? So at the time when you're doing your own programming, how would you devise that? Like, you weren't yet introduced to RPE, were you?
No. So, like, if we're going back that far, it looked real West Sidey.
Okay.
There were a couple things. Now, again, so the environment at the time is real heavy into equipped lifting and equipped lifting focused. So even then, like all the stuff that I'm reading about Westside is talking about building up your triceps, building up your posterior chain, and squatting with a wide stance and stuff like that. Basically, for everyone, your triceps are weak, your hamstrings are weak, and that's basically it. So like I went into it with this mentality, and I did make a couple tweaks to it because I care about my raw lifts even in the beginning. Like that was the thing that interested me personally. So like for max effort exercises, I was picking stuff like chest level pin presses and stuff like that. But back in the day, I do remember I was trying to do West Side training, right? Yeah. And screwing it up for sure. But I'm trying to figure out how to use bands in my squat so I can use these bands speed squats, right? But the dumbbells that we had in the gym were not heavy enough to like anchor down a band. So I thought, well, you basically get the same effect. Like if you hook the band from the top, you can just add a little bit more weight. It's basically the same thing, right? Yeah. Well, so I did this cycle with basically reverse band speed squats and got way weaker. You did?
It went to the opposite.
Oh yeah, man, it was bad. So back in that time, a lot of the information was coming through the Elite FTS Q&A, and Dave Tate. It was like two guys, Dave Tate and Bob Youngs, were on it at the time or something. It was something like that. It was when it was a lot smaller, and I wrote in. It was like, hey Dave, I did this cycle. This is what I did, and it didn't work. Like, what gives, And he was like, look, I'll be in the office on Saturday. Give me a call, and we'll talk about it.
No shit.
And no kidding, man. And I called him, and we talked for like 2 hours.
Whoa.
Just some random high school sophomore, know. And he talked, and he was like, yeah, look, that's not going to work, and you've got to do that, change these things, and really helped me get things back on track, And I would say overall it was productive. Like I was a strong dude in high school, at least compared to the other people that I knew,
Yeah.
So
it's crazy because Dave, he has no idea that you're going to go on to be Mike T. You could have gone on to just done whatever, been a football player, and then packed it in a few years later. And that's why you always pay it forward because you have no idea who you're talking to. That kid on the way up, you never knew that kid who's got a little pep in his step. You don't know what he's going to end up doing.
Yeah, I think it speaks volumes to Dave's character that, he's willing to go out of his way and do stuff like that, Yeah. Because, it's like you said, I'm nobody, at the time, just some high school kid. He's probably thinking, this kid's not even going to listen to the things I'm saying, but he does it anyway. And I think that's really cool. So.
Yeah, so your programming, were you using, in terms of trying to find the weight you would use, would you just do like a percentage based, or was that what you were doing at the time? Or?
No. So, max effort was maxing out, and dynamic effort was, the percentages that were in all the articles at the time were like 60 to 70%, mostly closer to 60. And even toward the end of it, they were starting to talk about like 55 and stuff like that as far as percentages. So it was percentage based for the dynamic effort stuff. And then just maxing out on the max effort exercises. I tended to stay a bit heavier on some of the assistant stuff, heavier board work and stuff like that for the bench. And lots of good mornings, just a stupid amount of good mornings.
Really? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So at my best, this was a bit later, I was in college, but at my best, I was able to do a good morning with 500 pounds for 5. But I could only squat 600.
Holy smokes! Wow, you were getting ready for the Good Morning Nationals.
Dude, so it was like I had an epiphany like when this happened. I was like, geez, man, like I'm spending all this time doing good mornings and I'm getting really, really good at good mornings. Yeah. I wonder if I spend a lot of time just doing squats, if I'd get really good at squats.
Yeah. It just hits you. Just mind blown. Wow, yeah. A breakthrough moment.
Oh, I know, right? It's just the way that you learn things, I guess,
So when you, when abouts did you start making like U.S. national teams going to the IPF World Championships?
So pretty rapidly. So 2003, I got on our collegiate national team. Did a couple competitions there. Well, I went to collegiate nationals that year. I'm getting fuzzy on the details now. One year I bombed out. Had a lot of trouble with that early on in my career. And I think that's part of the growing pains of being self-taught so much, and probably stubborn too. But pretty early on. So 2005 was my first Junior Worlds, and that was in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I placed third, I think, that year. I want to say third. And then the following year, 2006, Junior Worlds was in Sofia, Bulgaria, and that year I won.
Oh, okay. And how was that? Yeah. What were the worlds looking like back then? 2000, like 6, 5, and a whole ball game?
Yeah, it was a lot more similar to what you'd see at like Open Worlds now. You know, it was dominated by Russians and Ukrainians mostly. Mm-hmm. You know, and we had some bright points coming in here and there. But yeah, it was, there was a German coach. Do you remember Rudy?
Yes.
I don't remember Rudy's last name, but Rudy's since passed away, which is really too bad. But I remember in 2005. So I'm going to Worlds. This is my first exposure to anything like that. And, you know, you walk into the venue and there's people from all over the world that are there and everything. And so you're walking around and like, I'm just overwhelmed by all this, you know? And so I kind of walk and find my way back to the warm-up room. Mm-hmm. And I get back in the warm-up room and there's Rudy. So you have to imagine like this heavy-set German guy. He has like a heavy brow and everything. And he's standing up on a bench wearing nothing but his underwear, just like yelling at people in German. You know? And I was like, what the hell is going on here? You know? And somebody who was with me was like, oh, that's Rudy. He's the German junior team coach. You know, that's normal here. You know?
So it's around, and at that time too, this is obviously I don't even know if Facebook was out yet. So in terms of like social media, you really walked into these competitions. You didn't know what everybody was doing in terms of the free flow of like information, who was who. People literally came out of nowhere because I mean you have no way of scouting and keeping it intact. So it's a bit of a different ball game at that time. And then around I think it was like 2007, 2008, social media started really picking up. Had Facebook started getting introduced, and so how has the game, do you find, really changed since social media came in? Because it looks like, in terms of Instagram, I think our sport goes hand in hand with Instagram, like holy crap. Like almost no other sport, we capitalize on Instagram so well and build such good followings, right?
Sure, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, and to be honest, like in large part, I still feel a bit lost by all of it, because like the whole Instagram thing, like, I mean, I know the functionality and how the stuff works, but like, I don't use it anywhere close to its full potential because it's still foreign to me, you know? And where a lot of people, you know, kids these days, it's a lot more native to them, you know? But yeah, like, I'm, you know, taking a break from competing and stuff like that now, but even then, like, I didn't follow my competition on Instagram and like check up on people and stuff like that. Like I didn't get into that side of it very much. And I think there's something to be said for that. Now that's, I'm sure, not the right decision for everybody, but for me, it really agreed with my temperament. You know, I wanted to focus on what I was doing. And I still believe this, like for everybody, if you go to a competition and you lift the most weight that you can possibly lift, then that's the best that you're going to do, and you're going to place as high as you can place. And the rest of it's not in your control. You know, so is it worth getting worked up and anxious over, oh, so-and-so just squatted whatever, and now you've got to what? You know?
You know, like, you're not going to magically put 50 pounds in the squat, because he just...
Right. And to be honest, I think it can lead to some bad training decisions. You know, like you see somebody else do whatever and you think, I've got to make up that ground. Well, how are you going to make up that ground? Because conceivably, you're already trying as hard as you can.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Unless you're just like, oh, well, I'll only lift every other week, you know, and just kind of really take it easy here. Like, then, okay, I can see you need some motivation. But for most people that are competitive with this, they're already trying as hard as they can.
Yeah.
So you see somebody else hit some big lift and you think, well, I have to try harder. Wrong answer. Because now you're going to do something dumb and you're going to get hurt, or at a minimum, you're not going to progress as fast as you were progressing before. Like, you need to make the best training decision possible. Get as strong as you can, as fast as you can. But you can't do more than that. And if you're trying as hard as you can, then trying harder doesn't help you.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Because you would have done it already. This is a good segue into, how did you find RPE?
Good question. So, I mentioned joining the academy team. That would have been 2003, 2004. It was me and two other people. And at the end of the first year, those two people quit. They decided that it's a tough school and there's a lot of other things to focus on. But being on a team by yourself isn't very appealing. So I went out and recruited a bunch of people. And, you know, actually we became buddies, and I still work with one of them, maybe a couple of them now. But, you know, so I recruited a bunch of these guys. And now there's a bunch of new people and me, you know, and they're like, okay, so what do we do? So I'm the de facto team coach, you know. So at the time, like I said, I'm obsessed with powerlifting and powerlifting training and stuff like that anyway. And now I have some other people that are basically my guinea pigs, but also, you know, you care about them and you want them to do good, and you're trying to build up this team, you know. So I'm learning and I'm experimenting with stuff, and also at this time, people always ask, like, what books should you read about training? Now at this time, people would always say the top of the list, number one book you should always read about training, Super Training. Yeah. You know, never mind the fact that nobody could read it and it's basically impenetrable and it's so general that it's not all that applicable to powerlifting, and like there's a bunch of problems with it, but it's like nobody cared because at the time that was the right answer. So what did I do? I'm reading Super Training, and I would like just try my best to digest this thing, and there's a section in there where he talks about RPE. Now at the time, RPE has its roots in endurance training. Yeah, that's what a lot of people don't know. Oh yeah, for sure. You know, the Borg scale is a 6 to 20 rating, and it's supposed to be more in line with your heart rate. So if you rated something at a 10, that would correlate with like 100 beats per minute. You know, a 15 is like 150 beats a minute. You know, and so on. So I'm reading this, and I'm kind of thinking about like how would I apply that to lifting weights, and I remember reading a lot of stuff about like from actual powerlifters and practitioners saying stuff like you should leave a rep in the tank in your training and stuff like that. And so I started to put these ideas together and say, okay, well, how would you apply an RPE scale to powerlifting? You know, and at the same time, I've got this other knowledge about how you should leave a rep in the tank and stuff like that. And you kind of marry those two together and you get something like the RPE chart that's basically been unchanged since then. So you were the dude who brought in RPE from endurance to powerlifting. As far as I know. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, there'll be someone else who's going to raise their hand. Hey, what year was that? Because I around that time. Yeah. Sure. But you were the first. You're the first guy that you knew to come up with it. No one told you this is what you do for powerlifting. You decided, hey, there's some endurance athletes. Because when this happened in endurance training, it was a big boom. Like, it changed their game as well in terms for endurance athletes. Because a lot of times, I mean, it makes sense. You could easily burn out for endurance if you're just running too much and you're just, that central nervous system's burning out. So they had to figure out a way how to run longer without overtraining. And that worked out for them. And it totally makes sense, right? The central nervous system's just a fragile thing at the same time, right? And it's adaptive. So your marriage right there is a huge game changer. Like, you realize, like, when people look back, that's one of the biggest changes in the game in terms of for our sport. I mean, I think so. Like, I look at it now and I think, you know, it's a fundamental metric of training. You know, like, how hard was that for you? Like, just knowing that gives you so much more information. It lets you figure out, like, what your capacity was for that day. It lets you measure fatigue. It lets you track changes in performance. It lets you communicate more clearly. You know, it just gives you a lot of stuff. And I think it's a fundamental metric like intensity or like volume. It's like you can't really talk about training metrics without some of this language, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I see it now. Now, I think as a concept, it has to have been in use before that. And like I said, there were a lot of guys at the time talking about, like, leave a rep in the tank in your training. It wasn't quite so crystallized of an idea.
Yeah.
But, you know, a lot of these ideas are, like, latent. They're, like, just kind of more beneath the surface until somebody figures out how to articulate it. And
make it a system. Somebody's got to come around, make it a system, organize it, and an easily digestible system for sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll claim that part of it.
There you go. There you go. So what year was that when you started doing this?
That would have been 2005.
Holy smokes! You know? So RP training's old. It's a lot older. So when it first started, I guess, were you like, when did it really start taking off? Because I remember when I first started. So I'm a couple years later, 2007. It was like almost all percentage based. You get Excel spreadsheets, punch in your one rep max, and it tells you what your other lifts will be, yada yada. When really did RP start taking off and spreading?
That would have been around 2008, because that was the first year that USAPL went to the Arnold, and I'd graduated from the Air Force Academy. I was stationed at Vandenberg Air Force Base on the central coast of California, and I wanted to do a competition. So there's this like random competition in Hemet, California. It was about 4 hours south. And so I contacted the meet director, equipped competitions, right? So I contacted the meet director and was like, hey, I want to come down and do your meet. I don't know anybody. I don't have anybody there to help me or handle me or anything like that. Do you know anybody, or can you hook me up? He's like, yeah, we'll find somebody for you. So I get down there. And again, like I'm not anybody. Like I won a junior world championship, but that's, you know, whatever, right? Yeah. So I show up down there and I introduce myself to the meet director, and you know, hey, you mentioned that you knew somebody who could help me. He's like, yeah, let me introduce you to Mike Bridges.
No shit!
Like, wow. No kidding, man.
Yeah.
He just like happened to be in the area and he was willing to help me out, you know?
Yeah.
And so he handled me at that meet. Now that meet was also the first time that I deadlifted 800 pounds.
Whoa.
And yeah. So I had a great meet actually, and hit an 800-pound deadlift at the end. And somebody snapped a video of it, and it got published on Powerlifting Watch as Mike Bridges deadlifts 800 pounds. You know?
That's giving a little much credit to the handler.
You can still look up the article on Powerlifting Watch, but like the comments is like, unless Mike Bridges grew like 1.5 feet, then that's not Mike Bridges, right? Yeah. But that was kind of that gave me a lot of exposure, you know. So at this time where, you know, I was kind of not really anybody, and we're training up for the Arnold, the first time USA Powerlifting is going to be at the Arnold and all this. So there was a lot of hype going into that. And, you know, some new kid on the block deadlifting 800 pounds, you know, going to the Arnold, and that helped. And so a lot of stuff like that helped me kind of gain some more notoriety in the community. And message boards were a thing back then. And people used to post training logs on message boards, and I did the same, and there kind of became a little community that started to form around it. Like I was talking about my training and RPEs and stuff like that, and, you know, and the idea started to grow from there. So I would say that was probably the tipping point, was probably around the 2008 time frame.
And I remember, you know, I Googled you to grab like a good pic to use. And I found an old, I think it was Powerlifting USA, and it said, young gun, You know, and it showed you, like, I think it was at the World Games in 2000, was it 9?
Nah.
And it was like the young gun of the sport or something like that. I was like, oh, that's cool.
I think I got framed up on that.
Oh, no kidding, yeah.
Yeah.
So, did you win those Worlds? The World Games there?
The World Games in 2009, yeah, I won that one.
Is that probably, what is probably the biggest victory for you? It's still the sweetest you look back,
sure.
was it? Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, so you have the arena, first of all. Well, let me back up a bit. I remember, like, I've traveled a bit to competitions before. Like I said, I've been to Bulgaria. We've been to Worlds in Canada and some other things. So when we flew to Taiwan for the World Games, and when I get off the airplane, there's somebody there to greet you, which is nice. It didn't always happen.
But, for sure.
But instead of like taking you to your hotel, they took you to a welcome center. And there was like this, it reminded me of like a processing line in the military. It was like this big long line, and they gave you a backpack. They gave you just all kinds of stuff, like shirts and posters and just whatever else, like all this World Games swag.
Yeah.
They gave you like a prepaid SIM card to put in your cell phone so you could call home and just like all this stuff.
So you felt like a for real athlete at a, like, this is World Games for anyone who doesn't know. How many events are in it? This isn't just powerlifting. This is like,
it's like 80 sports.
80 sports, and it's sports that sometimes leave the World Games, go to the Olympics, come back. Like there was like softball, golf type things. Like there was like
sure.
Sure. It's a big event, massive event.
Yeah, and it's once every 4 years. You know, I would consider it, and I think a lot of people would agree with me that that's like the pinnacle of powerlifting in the sport. Yeah. And I mean, you're exactly right. Like you feel like a real athlete.
Yeah.
You know? Like they take you to the hotel, and so this is in Taiwan. They had hired students from the local college who spoke English to just sit in the lobby of the hotel and translate for you if you needed.
No kidding, that's pretty sweet, man.
Yeah, and so like if you wanted to go somewhere, like they would call you a cab, they would tell the cab driver where you wanted to go, and they would like write something on a card and say, when you want to come back, just give this to the cab driver and he'll bring you back.
Dude,
you know?
Wow.
Yeah, I mean it was just awesome. And I remember going to the training hall at the World Games. This was days before the event, like 4 days before the event. And they had volunteers at the training hall who would load your weights for you.
Whoa, no kidding. Yeah.
Yeah, and like it was all new equipment and everything. It was just a fantastic experience.
Was this on TV too there?
I'm sorry?
Was this on TV there as well?
I think so. Because I remember a lot of us would like watch parts of the competition from the hotel. You know? So, yeah. I mean, and the venue itself would seat like 3,000 people, and it was sold out for like weeks ahead of time.
That's awesome. People buying powerlifting tickets.
And like the closing ceremonies, they built a brand new a new stadium for the closing ceremonies, and somebody told me that it seated like 300,000 or something like that. I mean, it was the most wild sport experience that I've ever had in my life.
What's going to top that? Holy smokes.
I know, right? Yeah. Yeah, it was super cool. Very, very
and
awesome.
then winning a gold medal. Was it a battle that day? Was that when you won the gold, or? Yeah.
It's a really nice medal. I've got it down in the gym. I don't know. I like to keep stuff like that these days, but I remember like winning that medal, and afterwards there was like a receiving line of people that wanted to take photos with me, and it lasted for like 30 minutes, you know?
Holy crap, man! You were like a star that day!
Yeah, I mean, like, talk about a boost to a guy's ego.
Yeah, you came home with a little pep in your step. Broke up with your girlfriend. Had to be... You're like, baby, my price tag went up. I'm a big deal.
Right? Yeah, you feel like you did something for sure. But yeah, it was cool.
So that's around 2009-ish. And then around, when the sport really took a boom, when was the big change? Because around 2009, there was like powerlifting obviously was a big sport organized, but there was a massive boom coming. Kind of coincided with the IPF going raw and Instagram, social media just exploding. And then all of a sudden we would have a guy could have 100 to 200,000 people following him on Instagram, and we have like minor celebrities now in the sport, right? So,
sure.
when was that boom? Was it around when the IPF went raw that you noticed?
I guess so. Like that would have been 2012. So USA Powerlifting was having Raw National Championships before then. You know, and I remember maybe 2013 or 14. I remember there was a Raw National Championship in Orlando, and they had, I want to say, 300 lifters. And I remember we were all like talking to each other, like, can you believe how big this meet has gotten?
Holy, you know? Really? With 300 lifters?
Like this is unbelievable.
Yeah. You guys had no idea what was coming.
Oh, no. And I mean, it's like 2 years later and they're topping 1,000 lifters, you know.
It's just nuts. The talent pool that we pull from now, it's just so much more competitive. I mean, it feels like every year the records just get smashed and it goes up and up and up. What guys are doing in the 105s, now 83 kilo guys are doing. It's crazy, man.
Yeah. I mean, I remember at one point thinking, this was kind of toward 2015, 16, somewhere in there. And I would say the 105 class, which, by the way, is one of the most competitive classes now, it was kind of one of the last ones to the game, you know?
Yeah.
Like, every other class was starting to get real competitive and real deep, and except for that one. That one took a little bit longer. And I remember thinking, like, you know, I could cut down to 105, you know, and if I could just keep from losing 100 pounds on my squat, I could squat a world record.
Yeah.
You know? Now, keep in mind, like, cutting to 105 for me, like, that's a one-way trip. You know? You know, so that's not a thing that you want to do very often.
No.
So, like, I was only, like, half thinking about it anyway, but I had some friends of mine who were like, yeah, are you stupid? You know, so don't
you gonna chop your arms off?
Right, and I mean, it's a good thing I didn't, too, because, you know, like, it's like later that year, that's when all these, like, super strong 105 guys started showing up and just crushing things, you know? And I look at it now and I go,
good to get it. That's the thing, like, it was progressing so fast. If you're a weight class up, and you're like, oh, if I drop a weight class, you know, I could maybe smash this record, that record. By the time you get there, by the time you get the weight off, those records are gone. Like, no records last these days, you know what I mean? It's so uber competitive.
It's nuts. It's nuts. And I think that's a good reason why you should, like, keep your eyes on yourself, basically. Do what's best for you in the long term. And, you know, if you can do it, then you're going to do it. Like, cutting a weight class or, you know, manipulating these certain things, most of the time that's not, you know, your best strategy. Your best strategy is to go where you're most competitive, like where you're going to perform your best, because it's competitive everywhere.
Yeah.
You know?
These days, for sure, there's no place to hide.
Yeah.
You know, no place is safe. That's 100%. So, looking into, I mean, everyone's going to want to hear about RTS and a bit of into the training and whatnot. So, when did that really start formulating into the RTS we know today?
Well, the manual was released in 2008, which is pretty crazy. So, we're coming up on the 10-year anniversary next July.
Oh, congratulations, man.
Thanks. So I've been thinking about writing like a revision to that for like 5 years now. You know? And so now, like, it's like, man, you know, the 10-year anniversary is coming up. Like, you know, look, man, it's time. I've got to just kind of get off my butt and do it, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I've been working on it, actually. I'm a few chapters into it, and the aim is to get it done and hopefully release a new revision next summer. Because, I mean, I've learned a lot in 10 years of coaching people.
Well, 100%.
You know, so.
The game has changed, and what you must have experienced. Yeah. When that manual came out 10 years ago, did you take any kind of heat and flack from these percentage-based guys? Like, some people, you know, the guys who were stuck in their ways, or what?
No. Like, honestly, that didn't come until later.
Oh, okay. Because it came.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But I don't know if that's because, like, I was, you know, it's still like this new idea that people are kind of like, well, they don't pay any attention to it.
Yeah.
Or if it's, you know, maybe I was insulated from it because social media wasn't such a big thing then. I don't know. Who knows? But yeah, I mean, in the beginning, I started, like, I had this book, you know, it didn't even start out as a book. Like, so I was training all these guys at the Air Force Academy, and I thought, well, I should write down these things that I'm learning, you know. So I started writing, and it started to grow, and I thought, well, maybe I'll get this published as like an article series in Powerlifting USA, you know. But it continued to kind of grow and grow, and I thought, well, maybe I'll self-publish it as a book, with the hope that maybe I'll make enough money from it to pay for some of my travel expenses to go to these competitions and stuff like that. So I self-published this thing as a book, and I was calling around to Ken Anderson and, you know, whoever else had storefronts at the time to see if they wanted to distribute the book, and that's kind of how it all got started. And one day, this was in, you know, late summer 2008, somebody emailed me and was like, hey, will you coach me online? And I was like, that's a thing?
Yeah, no shit. Yeah.
I'm like, sure, yeah. I mean, we'll figure this out, you know. And that's kind of where it all kicked off, like the business side of it.
In terms of RTS. So what would be some of, like, the better known people who were against the RPE, and when you started feeling a little bit of pushback, like, no, it's not the way to go? Because there's always... That wasn't until, like, a lot more recently, I would say. I would say the last 3 to 4 years, I would say. Because that's when I started, I'll be honest, like, before a few years ago, I didn't know about RPE either. For me, it was just, you got Excel spreadsheets, you punch in your numbers, and then bingo bango, you got your numbers, like, you know, with the formulas out back.
Yeah.
And it was really like social media, people posting, and it would say, you know, at symbol 8 RPE, and I'm like, what the fuck is this? And I was like, I'm into it. I was interested. And again, it's really like social media, it's a yin and it's a good and bad. I mean, there's bad things with social media, but with social media, in terms of like disbursement of information, and that's half the reason why our talent pool not only got bigger, but way smarter, way more educated. Training ideas spread like wildfire in terms of technique and everything. So that's really when I seen RPE. And then, so immediately I was hooked, became a huge RPE guy. Thank you, Mike T. But there is some people here and there who, I don't know if they just don't understand it or they're applying it improperly, but just like anything that takes off and becomes popular, you're going to have people backlash it and trying to push it.
For sure.
Yeah.
Now, there are definitely some legitimate criticisms of the system, of RPE itself. So RPE is just a tool to be used. Like, you can use it as part of a larger coherent system, or you can use it in isolation. There's definitely criticisms for it, but it's funny, like, you know, those things, the limitations of the tool need to be talked about. Like, they need to be acknowledged so that you can use the tool effectively. But what I see so much is that the people who want to criticize the loudest have the least understanding of it. You know, like, the things that they criticize aren't those weaknesses in the tool, they're misunderstandings, you know? Now, I think I have a lot of responsibility to take for that too. Like, if I'm going to say that I'm the guy that is responsible for educating people on this, and there's, like, widespread misunderstanding, I mean, what does that say about my education?
Yeah.
But, so like, for example, I would go to seminars and I would tell people, like, RPE stands for rate of perceived exertion, and it means basically how hard did it feel. That gives people the wrong impression because they think of it as like, oh, this felt really heavy. Like, no, it's not that. So the way I say it now is RPE stands for rate of perceived exertion, and it's basically an assessment of your performance. It's not about, oh, it felt heavy in my hands. It's like, how did you perform in that set? Like, did you have more capacity? Could you have done more? Or not? You know, was that at your limit? You know, and I think when you look at it through that lens, some of the complaints against RPE as a tool are misunderstandings of the tool. But again, any tool's got its limitations, and that stuff has to be acknowledged if you intend to use it well. You know.
What would be some of those limitations that you've noticed yourself that you've kind of even adapted? Sure.
So. The scale that we use is like a 1 to 10 scale, but really we tend to focus on like 5 to 10 for lifting weights purposes, at least. Yeah. So a 10 is a max effort. No reps left in the tank. That's the most you could do. You know, a 9 is I could have done 1 more. You know, an 8 is I could have done 2 more. Now, once you go below 8, it starts to get a bit more fuzzy. It starts to be more related to the bar speed of the last rep and stuff like that. It's a bit harder to nail down those RPEs with a lot of precision.
Yeah.
So if I want somebody, take a classic, I guess more of like a Shako style protocol that you might see would be to have somebody do 5 triples at 80%. Now, most people, you take your average lifter, they can do 7 or 8 reps at 80%. So to take 80% for a triple is not that hard in the sense of approaching a maximum. You know, it's not like a triple is the most number of reps you can do. RPE wise, it's going to be like a 6. You know, it's really hard to tell the difference between a 6 and a 6.5 or a 6.5 and a 7 and so on, right? So if I wanted you to do something like that classic Shako protocol, you know, and I use an RPE system. I sent you to the gym and say, I want you to do a triple at a 6 RPE. Like that's hard to figure out, you know, and the costs of being wrong, you know, are not that high, you know. So one of the main advantages of RPE is that it adjusts the weight based on your performance. You know, if you're having a good day, you put on more weight. If you're having a bad day, you put on less weight. We want you to have good days, and you should have good days most of the time if your training program's working. So, you know, on the whole, we want you to add more weight to the bar. Now, in a scenario like that, you know, where you're going to be working on like a 6 RPE, if you're having a bad day or if you're having a good day, like it doesn't change things that much. It's still highly submax effort work. You know, so I found that if I want somebody to do work that's like that, it's just easier to give them a percentage and say, go do it, you know, because if we're off, if their performance is off from what we expected, then it's not that big of a deal. And it saves them the anxiety of going, man, was that a 6 or a 6.5? I don't really know. So
what about one thing that I've noticed, very rarely you're ever going to get an RPE 10 usually in training where it's just like you're going all out, you don't have a single rep left in you. But there is a difference between, let's say, all right, we'll just use round numbers to make it easier. Let's say, like, okay, you did a 500-pound single, and I couldn't double that, but I could probably sing, like, so that's your RP10, but I could probably still single also 520, but I couldn't double that. So you could take off weight, and there becomes a point where if you take off enough weight, I could double, but there might be a range in there of weight on the bar, because that single is, now though, the only thing with that, it's very rare you're going to get an RPE 10 single. Thinking back, I don't know if I ever had prescribed myself or seen one, so maybe it's not that big of an issue.
Not training, no.
No, like very rarely, right? But is there ever a situation like that where, okay, have you ever prescribed an RPE 10 single actually? Or is this actually a moot point?
Yeah.
You have? Yeah?
Yeah. I haven't lately.
Yeah. And what do? Do you just tell them, look, this is what I'm basically looking for? Go all out to like a complete, because there's a difference between, is there a difference between an RPE 10 and a complete, like your max, I want your max best single?
I would say there's a little bit of a gray area there. You know, like there are a few times where you'll complete a rep where it's like, look, that's a 10. You know, could I have done it if you added 5 more pounds to the bar? Yeah, probably. But, you know, like you're there, you're at a 10. Yeah. You know, if you're kind of somewhere, now I do let people go to like half point increments. And that was an evolutionary thing too. Like we started, it was, you know, it was very granular. It was 1 to 10. You know, it was, you know, an 8, it was a 9, it was a 10. That was it, you know. But it became clear that there is kind of this gray area between numbers. And it is something that you can perceive, for a lot of people anyway. So that's where we got more like 9.5, 8.5, and so on, you know. And that's kind of where I'm happy with it being. I've had a couple clients over the years who wanted to go like, that was an 8.25, and I'm thinking like, look,
you're like, slow your roll, you know? Slow your roll, man. You're not, co-authoring my next book.
It's 8.41. Like,
that's right.
You know.
You're like, what the shit's that? You know, Ryan actually brought up, and this was a good, I don't know if, Well, how do you feel about this as well, in terms of like the evolution of RPE, which is kind of cool that you started something and now it's evolving and grown and taking on life. But you were telling me about Ben, was it Ben Pollock? And this is something that he did a video. I'll let you say.
Right. So, you know, RPE 8 at, I just nose torqued, I'm amped up, ready to rock. You know, there's a difference between that RPE 8 and I'm calm, I'm just going to go in, I'm going to hit what I'm supposed to hit, kind of calm-minded. Like, how would you go about with those two different, you know, scenarios? Because obviously they are different. I mean, we can jack ourselves up pretty good to hit another 30, 40 pounds on an 8, you know, rather calm, you know, hitting it for this, you know, 30 pound less. And I've seen people do it.
I have some people that I train, and exactly that, where they'll like, it was like, yeah, I moved that was an RPE, but yeah, you pace the gym and hit that like you're on the platform, and if you did that every day, like you move, in that moment you moved away like that, I bet you go in there and try that, you couldn't keep doing that, like it will catch up, right? So have you kind of evolved and changed a few things when that kind of stuff happens, or?
Well, so first of all, it's a really excellent point. I got into a pretty interesting conversation with a guy at Raw Nationals this year, kind of about the same thing. It's important to think about the rating that you're giving your RPE is for that specific instance. Because I'll see too where, say you'll give somebody a triple at a 9 RPE, and and that last rep got pretty grindy, right? Yeah. And they rack the bar, and you say, could you have done one more? And they go, well, if you had a gun to my head. No, that's not what I'm asking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what kind of a coach is like, do I got to start bringing a gun? I don't want to motivate you like that, man.
I know, right? Well, it's like, well, I kind of misgrooved that last one. If I hadn't misgrooved it, then yeah, I could have done one more. No, that's not what I'm asking either. Yeah. It's like, that time, that specific instance, could you have done one more? You know? Yeah. And if you got super psyched up in order to hit that rep, then maybe, yeah, you could have done one more on that instance. But, you know, the psych is kind of this external thing that you need to be aware of, you know? Yeah. Just like if you deadlifted 600 pounds on a deadlift bar, you know, but you compete at a competition that doesn't use a deadlift bar, you know, well, now there's a disparity between those two numbers, you know, and that's something else that you've got to keep in mind. Like I think of that as like the RPE number is the rating of performance for that specific set, and the other stuff around it is kind of external factors.
And you got to take into account, like, how hyped up did you have to get to hit that 8?
Like, you could take a 10, you could take a 10, turn it into an 8, and vice versa. Yeah. The following week when you go in with a smoked CNS, and you think you're going to do the same thing in a calm mind state, and it's never going to happen.
Is that one of the biggest, things that you have to deal with when you're training people? And like, do you watch videos sometimes just to see yourself? Let me see what your 8 looks like. You know, just
and it looks different for different people too. Like you get some people that are really good at grinding out reps, and for them an 8 is going to be slow. Whereas you take some like me on my bench press, it's like fast or not at all. Yeah. And I'll post a video of my bench press and say it's a 9 RPE, and people look at it and they're like, "Dude, that was like 6." And I'm like, "No, man, I'm telling you, I know there was one more rep and not another one." You know. Yeah. So a lot of it depends on the individual, but yeah, I mean, we've had quite a few people over the years who, you know, you give them an RPE program and things just aren't going so well. They're basically overtraining on it, right? They're accumulating too much fatigue, and you're like, man, this should be working. I'm not sure what's going on with it. Well, come to find out, they're getting like super psyched for every set.
I've done it.
Yeah.
I'll raise my hand. I did it to myself one time.
Now, that's going to be, it's worth saying, too, that's going to be a problem for pretty much any program, you know, unless the program, I guess, if it's designed with that in mind, like some DC training and stuff like that, has that as kind of a built-in assumption that you're going to just kind of go to another planet every working set. Yeah. So if you're building it with that in mind, then that's fair, you know, but you could build an RPE training, RPE-style program with that in mind, or something else, you know, like you could do a lot of different things. I would say most of my training that I write is not intended to go that direction, you know, But, you know, you work with the lifter too. Like some people are just generally more calm in the gym. Mm-hmm. So earlier this year, we sent out a survey getting personality type data from a bunch of lifters and correlating that to their training preferences. So we actually asked them questions about like what training have they found to be most effective for them. And we looked at only like the highest level, longest training people in this group. And we got like 125 people. The average training age was like 8.5 years. There's an average of like 425 Wilks. So the operating assumption here is that if you meet these criteria, then you must know something about what works best for you. Which, in fairness, that might be a good assumption, but it might not be a good assumption. But you got to start somewhere. So This is where we started. But what we found is that people that are high in extroversion or high in neuroticism tend to like getting psyched up for their sets. People that are low in extroversion or low in neuroticism don't like it so much.
What does that mean? We got some $5 words here.
Sure. So extroversion is kind of what a lot of people think of extrovert, introvert. Like, do you like social engagement? Like extroverts like social engagement. They like being around other people. They draw energy from that sort of thing. Introverts don't.
Okay.
Neuroticism is two things. It's emotional stability. So people that are high in neuroticism have high variations in their emotions.
Gotcha. And
they also tend to feel more negative emotions like fear, stress, and anxiety. You know, so if you're high in extroversion, you like this external stimulus, then you like getting psyched up.
Yeah. You
know, if you're low in extroversion, then you don't like that so much. It's easy to feel overwhelmed. And that's exactly how I feel when I go to a competition. Like, and a lot of people feel this way for like opening squats and stuff like that, but like it's so much that I'm not trying to get psyched up for my opening squat that I'm actively trying to calm down. Like I'm going, it's okay, you've done this, you know, so that's kind of where I fall on that, you know, but neuroticism is it's a little bit different, right? So if you have high emotional volatility, you feel a lot of negative emotions, my guess is that those people like to get psyched up because they're trying to use anger to mask that fear, you know? And if you're not prone to those types of feelings, then you don't need to do that, you know? So that's kind of, we've been looking at that. So I think there's a big component of just personality that goes into this. You know, if you're the kind of person that likes to get psyched up, then you're going to do it, you know? And if you're not, then you're not.
And that's kind of like basically the longer you're with an athlete, the more you get to know them on a personal level, an individualized level. I was actually, so at the World Championships, I was doing the commentating and I ran into Brett Gibbs, who you started training for those Worlds, in the back. And I was like, hey man, how's, shooting the shit, how's training going? And he was explaining, like he was super happy by the way, and he said, he started learning about like cycling, how you guys started collecting data back, and I love how you guys collect the data, and started being like, look, here's how long your cycles are before your strength level's coming back down. And only then are you going to start realizing your cycles, each individual lifter has certain little mini cycles that they have in terms of being able to peak properly.
Man, that was a fascinating concept when I first came across this. So, and this one is not my idea. So this actually comes from Dr. Anatoly Bondarchuk, who's super famous throws coach. Probably the most successful coach of all time, famous for coaching hammer throwers. Okay. But a lot of his writing is not so accessible. It's translated sometimes not that well, and you know there's some problems like trying to translate genius, I think. But where I got a lot more from it was actually talking to some of the coaches who used to work with him. So in the early 2000s, he came to Canada and was working with Canadian track teams. And there were some Canadian coaches who had worked with him. And so talking to some of those guys, I feel like I learned a lot about bottom-up style programming from talking to those guys. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that was one of the big concepts. Is like, look, we know that humans are complex. They're the most complex things that we know about. And the way that you address complexity is not with more complexity, which is kind of where we tend to go with periodization a lot of times. It's like, well, we've got all these interlocking cycles and all these things, right? And like, well, we're meeting a complex system with more complexity, and a lot of times that doesn't work. So what happens if we try to meet complexity with simplicity instead? You know? So let's simplify the training as much as we can, and just make it so that it's one thing that the athlete has to adapt to, and see how long they adapt to it, you know? And you may find that they'll improve for 3 weeks, or you may find that they'll improve for 10 or 11 weeks. It could be anywhere in the middle too. Like for me, I know that I'm about 6 weeks, and it depends a bit on like the character of the training. If you train with so when you think about a training week, most of the time programs have one training microcycle in each week. Now you can compress that so that you have 2 microcycles in a week. Now that changes how long your training cycle should be. You know, it'll make it a bit shorter, or you can stretch that microcycle out so that it lasts 2 weeks. Well, that'll make your training cycle a bit longer. So you can squeeze and shorten these cycles to fit however much time that you've got between now and the next competition. But knowing that about an athlete lets you get them up into like a peak condition, like a real peak condition, versus, you know, well, we train 3 weeks and then we deload every 4th week. Well, I mean, that's good because that covers everybody, you know? Like, you're not going to have somebody who, I think it's very rare to find somebody who's peaking in 2 weeks, and probably what's going on in that scenario is some other variable of the training is not quite right, because I don't think you get into a real peak condition after 2 weeks of exposure to a stimulus.
Yeah.
But anyway, that aside, you know, you can have a really short cycle, you can have a longer cycle, but it's got to be tailored to fit the individual athlete, you know, that way that they can actually get to these higher levels. Because if you think about it, take me, where I know that my training cycle, I can improve for 6 weeks. And then there's like this 2-week washout period, and then you have another 6-week cycle. So the whole thing is 8 weeks, let's call it 2 months. So that means there's only 6 times a year where I'm training in a peak condition, where I have training where I'm at my best, I'm hitting real PRs in training. That only happens 6 times a year. Like, that's a rare and valuable thing, you know? Where if I'm on a program that deloads me every 4th or 5th week, you know, then I never really get into those ranges.
Yeah.
You know?
If it's just cookie cutter, and you use the same one. Yeah. So when someone new comes to you, is it basically just, look, here's where I'll start you off, like a generalized template, and you're just collecting data, trying to figure out, okay, where are your numbers at, and then you start getting more and more personalized? Is that really how it works with the RTS?
A lot of it, yeah. You know, and so we've been trying to tackle this question in the last couple of years of, like, how do we get a better starting point? Because, like, if somebody signs up with you for coaching and you tell them, well, I'm not going to have anything good for you for a year, like, that's
that's bad sales. That's terrible sales.
Right. That's not going to work. So we've been working on trying to find. Now, I should say too that that's almost never the case, because you figure this stuff out. Like, you have tendencies and you know things that work, and even if you can't quite articulate why, you learn things, you know. But we've been trying to figure out how can we articulate this better. So we did, I would say, 2 inquiries on this so far. One has been an 80% rep test, where we looked at, first of all, we got a big cohort of people, had them do an 80% rep test and a 1RM test, and then put them on a variety of different programs to figure out what they responded best to. And it wasn't a huge effect, but we found that more often than not, do what you're bad at. You know, so I think I mentioned earlier that the average person can do 7 or 8 reps at 80%. If you score above that, then that's an indicator that you should probably try training with low reps. If you score low reps at 80%, so say you can only do 5 reps with 80%, that's an indicator that you should try training with high reps. And now that's not absolute for everybody all the time, not by a long shot. But if you're looking at your training and you're like, I wonder what I should try next, then there's an idea.
It's interesting to say that, because I've had people be like, you know, I find I work best in the 5 rep range, or etc. Actually, the other co-host, Randy, who's not here today, we got Ryan, but he tells me all the time, you know, around 5 reps, you know, after that it gets tougher, etc. So you would actually say, like, instead of actually catering to being, okay, well, we'll work in the 5 rep range more often, you would say, well, that means to me you got to do more than 5 reps.
Well, it depends on what you mean by they respond best to it, right? Because if you, let me tell you a different story.
Okay.
I've got this athlete that I've worked with for a long time. His name's Mike Barrazzo. We would train, and whenever we would get close to a competition, his results would kind of fizzle. You know, things would be looking great, you know, all set, looking like new PRs, and then just kind of toward the end, you know. Nothing dramatic, but just not quite what we expected, you know. When we started peeling back the layers on this and trying to figure out what is it that you're responding well to and what is it that you're responding poorly to, we find that he doesn't respond well to high-intensity training. You know, whether he likes it or doesn't like it is really irrelevant. Whenever the high-intensity training is in his program, his results fizzle. So we thought, what happens if we just stop doing that, you know? First of all, it's worth saying that that's really unusual for a powerlifter. You know, I think there's a selection criteria. Like, if you're going to be a powerlifter for a long time, most of us like training with heavy weights. They get results from it. If you didn't get results from it, you probably would have quit.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of selection criteria that goes into that. But for him, it just wasn't that way. So we trained him going into a meet, having done nothing heavier than, you know, a set of 6 at a 9 RPE, so like 7 RM loads, you know. And he went in and smashed some big PRs, you know. Now, it did cause some issues as far as, like, how do you do attempt selection when you haven't touched anything heavy? So, but that's a different problem to solve, right? Like, now what we do is we train him like that with these middle rep ranges that he responds really great to. And then we might have 1 or 2 workouts where he touches heavier weights. We don't intend that to have like a big performance boosting effect. We're just trying to gauge where he's at so we have good attempt selection. Because we know that he doesn't respond so well to it. Now, he might be one of these guys that scores high reps at 80%, which would indicate that he needs to train at high intensity. He might be, you know, but that's not relevant for him because we've established this thing that he responds best to. You know, I think where the 80% rep thing comes into play is, like, if you don't know, then that gives you a good direction to go in, you know. And it's the same with the personality. So, like, that was our other intervention that we looked at, because coaches for a long time have kind of felt like, you know, people that have different personalities respond to training differently. So it's like, well, can we quantify that, you know? And so we looked at the same sort of thing I was telling you about earlier with the extroversion and neuroticism. There's actually 5 traits in the test that we use. This is called the Big 5, and it spells the acronym OCEAN. So there's openness to experience, conscientiousness, which would be like morality, orderliness, just industriousness, and things like that. There's extroversion, your agreeableness. So people low in agreeableness tend to be competitively oriented. People high in agreeableness tend to be more cooperative. And then there's neuroticism, which we talked about a bit earlier. So we took all these 5 traits and tried to match them up against different training variables: volume, intensity. Do you like training with RPE or do you like training with percentages? Just all kinds of different things. Frequency, training time, different stuff like that. And we found a lot of things that do seem to make an impact. I would say extroversion and neuroticism tend to have the biggest impacts, but, you know, there's others as well. So, like, we've been talking about RPE and percentages and stuff like that. People that are low in openness, so that's openness to experience. They don't seek out new and novel experiences. They prefer routine. And they're high in conscientiousness, which typically is like high in orderliness. They like things to fit in their categories, and they like things to be organized and neat. They tend to prefer percentages, you know. People that are a bit higher in openness, a little bit lower in conscientiousness, they're more willing to try RPE training.
Do you do any kind of percentage for people?
Yeah, we'll use it. I mean, the way I see it at this point in my career is very much like just tool sets, you know. RPE is a tool, percentages are a tool. We're just trying to get you to put the right weight on the bar and lift it the right number of times.
Yeah. It's not like, look at, I'm known as RPE, I got to live and die by RPE, and that's it. And be, once you get stuck in your ways. Now, do sometimes you ever mix the two at all and say, here's RPE, I'm capping you, because you seem to rally yourself up for singles and blah, blah, blah. So you're like, don't go above this. You do that? Or?
Yeah. Well, probably the most the most common example that I've got of like, the most common example I've got of like mixing the protocols is it's become a lot more popular in powerlifting to hit a single at like an 8 RPE and then do some back off work after that.
Yeah.
And now I kind of borrowed the idea from, I suppose 2010 to 2012, powerlifting kind of went through this Bulgarian obsession. And I was no different. I kind of fell into that as well. And this is the way that I found to use that idea and make it work. So we'll do that a lot of times now, is where I'll send someone to the gym and say, I want you to do a single at an 8 RPE. And then after that, we're going to back off to a percentage, because it's like I said, I want them to be working at like really sub-max efforts and do a lot of volume. So they'll back off to 75% for fives or something like that. So that'll vary. So that's kind of a combination of RPEs and percentages. And,
do you often do these singles for, how do you feel about, because singles is like, for myself as well, back in the day, we didn't do a lot of singles. We did mostly triples, maybe doubles. Like I was on the board Chico and, et cetera. There's a bunch of different ones floating around back there. So are you, or does that change per lifter for you? What is
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a type of lifter that responds great to that. A lot of lifters actually respond really well to that type of intensity, and I think there's a lot of things that we can say are beneficial about it, especially for the competition exercises. Like, it's highly specific practice. It gets you to practice doing a single, which is what you're going to do in competition. It lets you get used to those levels of weight. So when you go to a competition and your opener is actually lighter than the single at 8 RPE that you just did for the last 8 weeks, that's no big thing, right? So there's a lot of things that we can say are beneficial about it. But really what it comes down to is, does the lifter improve when they do it? Because if they're improving when they do it, then it's worth keeping. And if they're not improving, then it's not worth keeping. We need to move on to something else. Like this guy, Mike Garazzo, was telling you about, he definitely does not respond to this type of thing. So for me to include singles at 8 RPE in his training would be dumb, Like, he doesn't respond to it. Why would you keep beating your head against that wall, So, I mean, individualization, I think, is the single biggest idea behind all of this stuff, is that the program's got to be individualized to the lifter. I just don't see any way around that.
And speaking, this kind of somewhat general terms, but in terms of programming, what's a couple things that you think people are like biggest misconceptions? I know for a while there, like, are you, in terms of, and some of the things that people should understand and incorporate, like, is volume really important? In terms of like how many reps you should be getting with your workouts, like 3x8s, or greater than 8s. Do you ever have people doing sets of 10 or greater at times?
Okay.
Yeah.
And they hate it.
Well, sometimes people hate it, sometimes people love it, but it's not probably hard to get so psyched up for a 10 RP 7 or something like that.
Yeah, man. So I think a lot of powerlifters, I mean, you're a powerlifter, right? So you have a preference for the heavier weights. And I think kind of when you're in the depths of that pre-competition cycle, a lot of times you kind of romanticize, easing off the weight a little bit and just getting a good pump in the gym. But then what I find is that when that time comes, that's when I get these messages on Facebook that are like, why are you doing this to me?
Like, how big a sets have you prescribed? What's the biggest you'll go?
Excuse me, sorry to keep clearing my throat here, but I would say the biggest would be like mile reps 15s. Yeah. So that'll be like, So my reps are, for anybody who doesn't know, it's a kind of rest pause training. So you'll do your first set of 15 reps. You'll put the bar down and take 5 breaths, and then do another set of roughly a quarter of the reps. So you're doing 4s in that case. So your first set of 15, you put it down, rest 5 breaths, and then you do 4. You put it down, rest 5 breaths, you do 4, put it down. Until you can't go anymore. So,
yeah. Okay.
So it's funny, right? Because if you sandbag on that first set of 15, like it's supposed to be like 15 at like a 9 RPE.
Yeah.
If it's more like a 7 RPE because you didn't put quite enough weight on there, because
you're going forever.
Make that 15 a little bit easier, and you're going to be doing those 4s forever.
That's right. So there's a gig, so you just shot yourself, you just played yourself, right?
Yeah, exactly. But that's probably as far as I go on a semi-regular basis, But yeah, like for stuff like overhead press and a lot of our more supplemental exercises, we don't have any trouble going to 10s and stuff like that.
Yeah. And how often do you incorporate those kind of assistance work? Is it heavily based, like, because sometimes it's a bit of a, it's a thin line where some people do too much, not focusing, like you were saying before with the good morning scenario back in the day, where I'm turning into a good morning expert. You know what I mean? Like, so where do you kind of toe that line? Are you just introducing it 20 minutes at the end, or what's kind of your range?
So what I like to do, as far as like exercise classification, again, so the Bondarchuk thing, right? So in the Bondarchuk system, he's got 4 classifications, and like the lowest classification is like general exercise, which would be, walking and biking and swimming and stuff like that for a powerlifter. So if we drop that off, you've got 3 classifications. You've got the competition exercise, and then I call this middle classification assistance exercise. Bondarchuk will call it special developmental exercise. But it's basically stuff that's really close to your competition lift, but it's got maybe 1 or 2 small changes. So things like pause squats, deadlifting with chains, and stuff like that. Like it's still a squat, still a bench, it's still a deadlift. It's just got 1 small thing changed. And then this third classification I call supplemental. He would call it special preparatory exercise. This is, it trains the same muscles, but it's a different overall movement pattern. So think like lunges or good mornings or overhead press, things like that, right? So I like to, at least in the beginning, include something from all 3 categories in every microcycle, in every training week. And then if we find over time that one thing, we need to divide our time differently, or one thing isn't working or something like that, then we'll split it up differently. But I like to start there and then kind of let the athlete response dictate where we go.
Because is it Westside that he would have you be doing, changing up constantly? Just variations on, was that the Westside?
Yeah, I mean, and so this is hard to nail down too, because it depends on who you ask, and they've got this thing where they like to say, some of the lifters like to say, like, you don't know Westside unless you trained at Westside. Like, okay, fine. Well, I'm going off of what was written in the articles by Louis,
Yeah.
So, and as far as I know, there hasn't been a huge amount of publication that changes a lot of those things. Although I will say, it seems like since Raw has gotten to be a lot more popular, the dynamic effort percentages have gone up, which totally makes sense, really.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's a whole other can of worms, maybe. But yeah, they would at least advocate changing the max effort exercise weekly for highly qualified athletes. So there was always kind of that catch that was in there that's like, well, if you're not a very high qualified athlete, then you would keep it in there for longer, but the high level guys needed to change the exercise weekly, which, okay, but from what I've seen in practical in action, basically, most people changed their max effort exercise weekly, and most people turned that dynamic effort session into a max effort session. So there was a bit of a difference, I think, between the theory and the practice for a lot of that stuff. Now, that's all pulling from circa mid-2000s, I guess. So a lot of things could be different now. I'll just throw that caveat out there in case anybody...
Yeah. Did you do any Westside running?
Well, I've done like the max effort and then speed days, especially around because my pec took, like from my pec tear, the speed days kind of felt a little better than doing another volume day.
Yeah.
So 8 sets at 2 with bands, whatever, just back and forth.
And you're saying
short breaks.
One thing you were saying was just to change up week to week.
Yeah,
it's a little different.
Yeah,
so
throw in your different what would be a pin press, throw in a board, throw in bands, on that.
Do you do a lot of pin presses, boards, bands, and throw stuff like that in there, or?
Yeah, actually we do. Like I like all that stuff, and I've got to say, like I learned all that stuff from Westside. Like that's where a lot of my training roots are. So like all those assistance exercise slots, I like to do stuff like pin presses and long pause benches and close grip stuff. And now I think that that's secondary to the competition exercise. I think you have to practice the competition exercise, and practicing that comp exercise, that's where you get the most return on your investment. Doing the other stuff is useful. I really think it's useful. I think you could argue that it's not, but in my experience, it's useful. It's just got to be dialed in to be what does this athlete respond best to. So like I know for me, my bench responds pretty well to things like pin press, but I don't respond so well to like long pause benching. But you take someone else like Kelly Branton, and he doesn't respond so well to pin press. He doesn't get that much stronger, and things start to hurt and stuff like that. But you give him something like a long pause press or a spoto press or something like that, and his bench blows up. So there's individual differences between these assistance exercises as well. So you've got to know those things, or at least be willing to look into it and figure those things out.
I've run into some coaches who they're just like dead set against certain things, like we don't use.
Yeah.
And it's always boggles my mind. Like, what do you mean? How do you? So everybody you train, nobody's going to use block pulls, or nobody's going to use boards for pressing, or whatever. Like, how is that possible? Is that ever going to be? Is that one of the things that bothers you with coaching in terms of what you see out there? You don't got to drop names, but.
Well, I guess so. Yeah. I mean, because now I'll be honest. Like for me, like I keep my head down and focus on our lifters as much as I can. But yeah, I mean, the only time I would take a tool out of the box and just say I'm not doing that is if I felt like it was an injury risk. But even then, I mean, like you have some tools where, like maybe you can see a use for it, but it's like rare and unlikely that you don't use it very often, right?
Yeah.
But like for me personally, I feel like a lot of the stability training falls into that realm, at least for powerlifting. Like I don't see much use for bamboo bars and things like that. But okay, fine. In the whole realm of strength and conditioning, I'm sure that there's a place for it, and that even if it's just a certain scenario, well, like, fine.
Would you ever have a Bosu ball in RTS training?
Yeah, well,
really? No kidding.
If to be honest, like if I was talking to a physical therapist that thought that would be useful, then yeah, we would have. Now, I don't see a way that I'm going to use it to make an athlete stronger. I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
But so the only time that I would take a tool out of the toolbox is if I thought like, this is probably an injury risk. We're asking for it if we keep doing this.
Yeah.
So we'll nix it at that point. Now, with that said, the only thing that you have to do, I would say, is the competition exercise, and even that you don't have to do it that often. So if you've got somebody that it hurts when they do overhead press. Well, there's plenty of ways around that. You've got to find a different way. The only essential thing is that you've got to be able to step on a platform if you want to step on the platform.
Yeah.
But
do you have any stories of dealing with some athletes that had some really weird responses to training and what they would use? Have you ever used stuff like some of them are like extreme partial movements? Sometimes you see that. With like a squat, like a very, shallow squat, but it's loaded up. Would you do stuff like that, or block pulls? I
haven't had any use for that. Block pulls we've found some use for. Like, it's not like widespread or anything, but I would say on the bench is where I've found it to be most useful. Now, it's interesting, right? Because you've got squat and deadlift, which in large part draw from the same pool of resources.
Yeah.
You know, they're both lower body movements. They tax a lot of the same muscle groups and same movement patterns and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So you're a lot more constrained when you're planning squat and deadlift training, you know, in terms of the available energy and recovery and stuff like that. For bench, you're not as constrained, and I find that usually almost always there's more exercises for the bench, so there's a greater opportunity to include things like overload work, you know, maybe we're working in a slingshot or doing some board work or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I'll find that it's useful. Now, I don't think that it's a game changer or anything. And then if we start to get time constrained, usually that's maybe not the first slot to go, but mm-hmm. it's one of the early slots to get cut out as resources diminish, you know. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, I would say it's useful. It's just not like that's another thing. Like, I don't get is that you'll have people that because they can't explain something, therefore it must be useless. You know, and that doesn't work either. You know? That's
true. Yeah. How many times you use something and it's like I'm not entirely sure why, but when I do this, it feels much better, and I've seen gains. Yeah.
Well, I mean, so I get that a lot. Like, whenever I post like a bench video, a lot of people want to know about my grip. Like, why do I grip it like that? And the real answer is because that's how I can bench more and it doesn't hurt, you know? That's why I do that, you know? Like, it would be cool if I had some like intense biomechanical reason and this is how everybody should grip the bar, but there's so much stuff that just isn't in that world. It's just, you know, well, does it work? You know, if yes, then find out why. If no, then move on to the next thing, you know?
And that's kind of what, whenever people start off, like, how do you squat, how do you bench, how do you dead, it's almost like we're going to start with the generalized template of where to put your feet, where to put your hands, but you always tell them there is no right and wrong. You know, in terms of like how far out your hands are on the bar, feet on the bar, where the bar is, low bar, high bar, it's going to change individually.
Sure.
The only way to figure it out is reps, you know, and keep working on it for sure. Sometimes people want that quick answer. You know, like, where should my hands be? And it's like, it doesn't necessarily work like that. What rep ranges should I be in? I'm not sure yet. You know, like, we got to work on this, And people want answers quick.
This is like this dichotomy, right? On one end, when you're a beginner, you need it to be simple, and it's got to get simplified. And that's why I think a lot of these there are a bunch of programs that are more focused on beginner lifters, and they all do that, right? They're all like, this is the way. Don't ask questions, just do it. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's because when you're a beginner, you don't have good questions to ask.
That's right too.
And so just do it and shut up and color for a couple of years, and we'll see where you wash out. You know, and after a while, you'll have better questions, and you can evolve past that. Mm-hmm. You know, but in the beginning, it's got to be distilled down in that way. You know,
we talked about one of your biggest moments as an athlete. What, as a coach, and you've had some of the bigger names. Maybe you could roll call a couple of the bigger names you worked with, and what was probably the biggest moment you had as a coach? Your proud moment.
That's hard.
So what are some of the names you've worked with over the years?
Oh, gosh. So Liz Craven had a really big weekend last weekend. Mm-hmm. So we've worked with Stephen Manuel, working with Dennis Cornelius right now, Kelly Breton right now. Man, and now we're starting name dropping. I'm gonna start leaving people off. You know?
I already said Brett Gibbs. You've worked with Brett Gibbs.
Is another good one. I mean,
Bryce.
We've been super fortunate. Bryce Krawczyk.
Yeah, Krawczyk.
Yeah, he's for real, man.
Do you know how many world record athletes who have broken world records, world champions you work with? Because almost all of them.
That is something I do know.
Okay.
So,
that's why I know Bryce.
We've worked with around a dozen at this point, world record holders. Wow. So 12 different lifters who've set IPF world records. Nice. So that's been and that's set a record while we were working with them. You know, like that's not they came with a record or something like that. They were working with them. So yeah, that's been really awesome, man. And to narrow that down to like one.
Was there one moment?
One moment.
Perhaps like a moment where, like for instance, when like I know you were involved in this one, but like when Hack met Gibbs and it was like, holy crap, this is hype, or the 105s this year, holy crap. Was there a moment where you walked in there, and you're like, holy shit, this is crazy hype. Like I can't believe this is going on. A couple of those moments.
Well, the 52 kilo world championship is always just on fire, you know. So I've been working with Liz for a lot of years now, but that weight class is just, it's incredible, man.
Yeah.
Like the 52 kilo weight class is just really something else. And like each lift, like you're going to see world records get smashed like a few times in each flight, you know, and it's just really fun to watch. So Liz is always one of my favorites to watch or to coach or anything like that. She's a lot of fun to work with.
What about, were you handling Manuel when he was at the World Championships in Belarus?
No, I didn't get to handle him then.
Okay. Because what would he be like to handle?
Dude, so I did get to handle him at the Grand Prix at the Arnold last year.
Okay.
And he's a lot of fun. You know, and all these people are a lot of fun. Like you've got it worked out by the time that they get to that level. It's like, look, you're going to do your thing. Some people want more contact. They want you to talk to them a bit more. Other people don't. Like Steven's just tell me when it's time to hit my warm-ups, and the rest of the time, like, he's just in the zone. He's got his headphones on, and I mean, he just hits a whole other level when it's time to go out to the platform, man.
When I was commenting, I was saying, like, I don't know if people watching online could feel it, but the energy in the room when that man hits the platform. Okay, so I was watching the platform, and I hit this like straight on cue. I was like, I wonder who's up next. And I was about to look, and I hear, and then I was like, what the fuck? And like a fire broke out, or a fist fight broke out. And he's in the silence, like, he's like a madman. He's smashing chalk, and the whole crowd loves it. Like everybody's like cheering, and it was like, wow, man, it was the energy. You know what I mean? Like it was if you've never seen powerlifting and you're like, and you brought a friend and you want to sell him on, no, this is exciting, this should be on TV. You hope he's in there, you know?
Sure, yeah.
And they can't all be screamers, but yeah.
Right, no, he's, and you know, that's an important thing too, right? Like, this isn't for everybody. Like, it's just who he is, so it's not, it comes across as authentic and it's
100%.
Yeah, I mean, it's real. Like, that's just who he is, you know?
Yeah.
And it's not something that, you know, you should try to imitate or anything like that, but like, look, if that's who you are, then that's who you are, you know?
Yeah,
and for him, it's so fun to watch.
If you try to imitate that, you probably gas out in terms of, like, you know, the RPEs are going crazy at that point. But,
well, that's keep him in an RPE scale.
Yeah, wow. So that's an interesting question, though. Would it be a little different working with a guy like Screamer in the RPE scale? Would you be like, all right, listen, how hyped are you getting? Because he was on the show. Like, again, he's a phenomenal character because his background openly talks about, like, depression, anxiety, and, like, and then when you talk to him, such a funny guy, huge heart, hits that freaking platform like an animal. Like, he's like one of my favorite lifters to follow, right? But is it, like, working with someone like that, you know, who's such a character and gets so amped up? Do you take that in mind when you program his RPEs, etc.?
Yeah, we will. You know, and it's one of those things that tends to come out in the wash, too, you know? So if you program high RPEs and it doesn't work for him, then you'll see that it doesn't work for him. Yeah. And so you'll naturally start to gravitate toward those things that do work for him. But, yeah, you know, he sent in videos and stuff like that when we were working together, and we would see things and, like, well, okay, we'll throttle this back, or he seemed to be responding better to more of, like, the low-intensity volume work or vice versa, you know, and so you tend to just dial it in as you start to see things, especially see the results of the training cycle start to come together.
Have you ever had, in terms of when you're coaching a guy or a girl, that just, one of those moments, I'm trying to find one of these moments, that surprised you, and you're like, oh shit, and they just dialed it in and had one of those days where you're like, wow, it couldn't have been more on point?
Gosh, I mean, you never know what to predict. Right, like when people go to competitions, like it could just come together and be there, or not. You know, and so that's always a tough thing to predict. And I mean, you can tell a bit. You know, like usually you can tell if it's not going to be there. You know, but
what do you do then? Are you like, oh no?
You always feel about this big when that happens.
You're like, oh no, what happened?
But you know, that's another reason why it's important to look at an athlete's response cycle. You know, like if you have an athlete that peaks every 4th week, you know, and then you start their last training block 5 weeks out, then I mean, you're going to be on the downhill slide by then. You know, and I've had guys who were in a taper, not a taper, we're doing like a deload week, like 3 or 4 weeks out from the competition, and they're sending me messages like, dude, this feels really wrong. Like, I'm 3 weeks out and I'm taking it easy. Like, this is weird, you know. But with their specific response times, we know that they're going to be in form on time, you know. So knowing that about an athlete helps you keep from screwing that timing, that peaking up so much. Like, that's huge. That's one of the huge advantages of actually knowing that about your athlete.
One of the biggest things I'm getting from this is just, you've got to know your athletes. You've got to take that data back. If you got a coach that isn't taking the data back, and he just keeps firing you new programs without knowing your data, he's just basically sending you whatever he's got on the go. Like,
it's a overpriced static program that's just slow dripped out to you. You know, like that's not worth it. You know, but now there again, like, I'm in no way the guy that invented, you know, got to get to know your athlete or individualize some training or anything like that. But what I'm trying to do is build more of a process around it. You know, like, we've said that forever. Like, well, you got to know your athlete. Okay, that's great. What does that mean? What do I do to get to know the athlete? Now, I think for the most part, people have been able to just kind of figure it out. But, you know, if we can find a process and help you learn how to do that, maybe you'll figure it out faster. You know, maybe you'll do a better job of it. So that's kind of where we're at, like, in terms of training development.
So we had you a little bit. We'll ask you 2 more questions, let you go. This has been a phenomenal interview, buddy. We got to have you back. Super informative.
I think we're milking it just so we get to learn more.
That's right. Well, that's just it. It's like, I just got to.
I know it's for you guys, but you know, we'll take advantage of this too.
So you always ask a question at the end.
I know this one's gonna work. This one's gonna be a little funny asking.
Okay.
Like this one. So I always ask at the end for the beginner powerlifter that just wanting to get going. I got 3 things, and 2 of them are probably fitting in the same category for you. But intensity, technique, and programming. For a beginner to put them and prioritize the 3 of them, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, what would you suggest?
And when you say intensity, do you mean like weight on the bar intensity, or you mean like mentally?
I like to think mentally, as far as, you know, a lot of them go in and they don't know their RPEs, they don't know what 80% is. They're building, their first 4 months they're building weekly for the beginner, right? So what they're, you know, just for those 3 things of importance, what would you say?
I would say technique, programming, and intensity. So first thing, get your technique in order. That has to be a solid foundation for you. After that, you need a program that is progressive, that you can actually follow correctly and consistently. And then after those 2 things are taken care of, I would say that, you know, being able to bring the heat in the gym, that comes with time, you know. You'll figure that out, you know, if you've been around it for a little while. I was talking to someone yesterday, and they had an analogy that I thought was this thing perfectly. That, you know, if you look at a wolf, you know, a wolf has its territory, right? But it's only its territory if it goes there every day. If it stops going there, then it's not going to be its territory anymore. You know, so for you, like, you take a beginner and you send them to the gym, like, this is new territory, and you're not at home, you're not comfortable there. And if you think back to, like, how you felt when the first time you go to a gym, you feel self-conscious or something like that, you know, you feel like people are judging you, and you know, like, you have a lot of those feelings. Now, if you go there consistently now it starts to become your territory. You become familiar with it. You're more comfortable there, and you know what the rules are and all this stuff. And now it's your territory, and that intensity will kind of, if it's in your personality to have that, then it'll come naturally once you get more familiar with that.
And the question I always like to ask is, when all is said and done, and I mean, you've brought so much to the game, right? You're literally a game changer, right? So you've already done a lot, but when all is said and done and you look back, how do you want to be remembered?
I want to be remembered as a great powerlifting coach. I think I want to be remembered as a coach more than I want to be remembered as a lifter. And I suppose more specifically as a coach who is interested in helping people hit their next PR. Like, look, I got to tell you that it's really cool to work with top level athletes, and that's a nice boost to my ego and makes me feel good and stuff like that. But it really doesn't matter if you're, a world champion or this is your first day. A PR means that you're better than you've ever been in your life. And getting to the next PR, that's the same whether this is your first day in the gym or whether you've been doing it for 20 years. That you just want to get to that next level. I want to be better than I was. That's consistent. And so if I can be remembered as somebody who was interested in helping people get to that level, then that's what I'm about.
Well said, my friend. Listen, really appreciate you coming on the show. This is very informative. I hope everybody watching live liked it. We'll post it up on the YouTube. Love to have you back.
Awesome, man. Thank you very much. You guys are great.
Nice. Sounds good. Have a good one, buddy.
You too.
Holy smokes.
You know why no one said shit when he brought up RPE in 2008? Because he won Worlds in 2009. You can't talk shit about the guy that made it, won with it. Right. What do you say? You're wrong. Really? How's his gold medal look?
Yeah, very well said. And his list of, he's got a dozen people under him that broke world records. Yeah. I mean, those stats don't lie.
No.
I mean, it's interesting too, though. Even though he created RPE and obviously believes highly about RPE, he said he'll even use percentage for certain people. He's not cut in stone that it's one way or the other. How many times you talk to people, sometimes they're like, this is shit. This is the way you do. I only do that. His flexibility, he'll use almost everything as long as it works.
And that's what I like, because he said he had a toolkit, right? And that's, when I'm coaching down clients for weight loss and stuff like that, you have tools you use. You don't throw them all at once, because then, you could be shit out of luck after 30 days. But he seems like he uses them as he needs them and puts them in order as where, they need to be for. That's what I like the best about that specific athlete. And the data's collected and, that testing and everything like that, like sending out the tests for, how they think and things like that.
Yeah, he's huge in the data collection.
Amazing.
Back when I started, 2007 range, like I was saying, we got Excel spreadsheets. Everybody did the same thing on the team. Like everybody was doing the exact same programs. And in terms of data collection, there was none. You just punched in your numbers, and then the Excel spreadsheet told you what to do. You hit it. And like you were going to get better. As long as you're deadlifting, squatting, benching, you're going to get better. But some dudes, if we were doing these programs, it was the Borshiko programs, if it was mostly triples up to fives, and you would have been better off doing far more volume, well then in that time period, you probably weren't maximizing your full potential. But nowadays, that's why so many world records are getting smashed, and progress is so great, because you got guys like Mike T, who think outside the box. Let me collect all this data from your vast majority of how far you could be pulling data from. It's not just local guys at your gym.
No.